Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's episode of Screen Club. My name is Sarah Naraki. I'm from Wealthy Theater. I will be the host tonight. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the cult classic show, the one and only, well, I shouldn't say one and only. There's another series coming on here, but the Twilight Zone, the original series, is what we are talking about tonight. Hopefully we've got folks joining us who have joined us before, but in case not, just FYI, we are likely going to be spoiling most of the episodes that we're talking about. So if you haven't seen Twilight Zone yet, you might want to pause this broadcast and go check it out. Caleb, where we have it streaming? I think it was CBS, Hulu.
Oh, well, yeah. All the seasons except for season 4 are on Netflix. And then the season 4 episodes are also available on Hulu and CBS All Access.
Awesome. So yeah, hop over to that. Go stream some of the episodes. Caleb has listed some top, must-see episodes on our Facebook page too. But just FYI that we're going to be spoiling a lot of stuff. So alongside me here, I have two wonderful panelists. So you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves. Caleb, let's start with you and your very colorful background.
Thanks. I don't know what happened. It's as yet unexplained phenomena happening.
That's what happens when you're in outer space, dude.
I know. My name is Caleb Dillon. I'm the front of house manager at Wealthy Theater, permanent resident of the Twilight Zone since before I can remember.
Awesome. Thank you. And we got to say, Caleb's the one that really recommended this because he is, if you cannot tell, a super fan of Twilight Zone. So thank you for picking this. I think it's kind of a happy accident how appropriate this show is right now. So this is going to be good. And then,
happy
of course,
accident.
Yes, very happy. And we have the founder of Screen Club here, the wonderful Virginia Ansengruber. What's up, girl?
Hi, welcome to my bathroom. It is not as exciting as the Twilight Zone, but my child is 13 months and very loud and has learned how to open and close doors. So God help me. If you see somebody come in, it isn't the Twilight Zone opening the door. It's just my kid wanting to hang out and hug me. But I'm super excited to be here, and really glad that Caleb recommended this because appropriate, yes, but also just like this show slaps, you guys. It's so good. And I had watched it as a kid. We kind of talked about this before we got on mic, but rewatching it in order to prepare for it, I don't even care that it was made in the 50s. The 60s, whenever it was, Caleb will tell us for sure, this show slaps. It's so good, and it's still so good. And so if anybody takes anything away from this other than spoilers tonight, it is that you should straight up, please just go watch it, if only for your own, tense and spooky enjoyment, because it's so well done. And, I just can't wait to get into it because there's so much on my brain from just, and I didn't even watch all the episodes on your list, Caleb. I'm not going to lie. I only watched half of them.
You didn't watch 100 episodes of a show in the last week? How dare you?
There's nothing else going on that would have distracted you from watching this.
Especially this weekend, it was just a lot of free time for all of us. There was
totally.
Nothing distracting us. So I'm stoked because it was just fun to kind of walk back down the memory lane, and kind of as a filmmaker and someone who studies film anthropologically, right? It's nice to kind of be reminded that something that came out, 80 years ago-ish now, is that right?
60
years ago, right? I can do math.
It might as well be, though. What's the difference?
Time doesn't exist anymore. But it's 60 years ago, something that, there wasn't even color involved in the presentation of the show, and it still just really holds creatively. It holds up so well. So I'm super stoked to be here, and let's get into it.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for being here. If anyone is tuning in right now that has not been part of either Screen Club or Cinema Lab, just to kind of catch you up to speed, this is like a book club style event. So normally we do this in person here at Wealthy Theater in the Conan Micro Cinema. So a nice intimate space where we can kind of sit around and talk about this. Usually we do have a panel like this so we can guide the discussion, but we still want to encourage that style of conversation. So anytime throughout this discussion, if you are jamming on something we're saying or want to talk about a certain episode or have a theory or anything like that, feel free to comment below. And we'll try to get to all the comments if we have time. Otherwise, we can always continue the discussion on like Facebook or Instagram later. But please jump in. This is not just the three of us talking all tonight. We want to hear from you guys too. So make sure you comment there. Well, why don't we just kind of jump in with Caleb, since this is a show you picked. Why did you pick it? What do you love so much about the show?
It was something that I saw from a really young age. I think that depending on where you are in the country, it was kind of a staple of a all-day marathon, usually around a holiday. I feel like it was Thanksgiving and New Year's Day. They would run, certain stations would run just constant marathons of Twilight Zone. And so I remember seeing it that way. I remember seeing it probably on, we're guessing, Nick at Night, in the early 80s, mid 80s.
Which, if somebody, and not to cut you off, Caleb, but if somebody can actually confirm or deny this for us, because I was trying to think about whether Nick at Night would have shown something that wasn't overtly like a comedy. I would love to try to find out where we saw this as kids, because I cannot remember.
It's a mystery for the Twilight Zone itself, how this became a thing in my life. But, it just, it was such a feeling. It was such a vibe. And from the opening theme music to Rod Serling himself, and just some of the weirdness involved in, and some of the concepts that just broke my brain open as a little wee lad. It didn't feel like anything else, and I was so attracted to things like that just felt like their own universe, and that you couldn't get quite that same feeling unless you were just watching Twilight Zone.
What about you, Virginia? You said Nick at Night theoretically is how you stumbled upon it.
And that's the story that I'm going to stick to until somebody in our chat will tell us that we were wrong. And of course, why would it be on Nick at Night? But it was either that or like, Sci-Fi Channel reruns late at night. But I also, I recently relocated back to my home state of Florida. I lived in Grand Rapids with you fine folks for about 5 years. And my first real memory of this show was actually the ride, the Twilight Zone, the Tower of Terror, which was a ride at Walt Disney World at Hollywood Studios. And now it has since been rebranded to be the Guardians of the Galaxy something. I don't know, because I haven't been on it since then. But I will tell you that it was cool because they really kind of captured the essence of like the production design, the queue line really kind of had that feeling as well. They really leaned into a lot of the music, and then they actually had, much like on most theme park rides, they would have like monitors kind of that would follow you through the queue line. And Rod Serling was there. I don't know if he recorded it. He was younger, obviously, so he didn't re-record it for the ride or anything, but they took clips and they sort of really set you up thematically to kind of emotionally be in the Twilight Zone. So when you got onto this ride that really didn't do much more than kind of just rise and drop and kind of open, and then at one point one of the levels took a picture, so then you would have a picture of yourself just going but that was like my first intro to it. And also as, just like a weird kid who liked movies, but also like loved the mechanics of things, right? Like I grew up in and around the time that there was like the ET ride, and, like Captain EO was like originally at Disney World, you know what I mean? So I don't want to say it was the golden age of theme parks, but it was the golden age of theme parks. And so the Jaws ride at Universal, these were all real time in my life as a child. And so I'm pretty sure that I was introduced to the ride first, and then kind of was like, oh, what's all this about? And then kind of as Caleb had said earlier, like as a wee lass, as my synapses in my brain were kind of able to understand deeper concepts than just a drop ride, I started kind of getting into it. And then also, and this is a whole other conversation, but this show then kind of had a spiritual successor, which was a show called The Outer Limits that ran live in the 90s and was more of a sci-fi angle, but anthology. It was an anthology series Each episode was different. And I think it really was kind of that spiritual successor to this show. And so I was an Outer Limits kid too, but all of that obviously was very heavily influenced by Twilight Zone. So just really gave me an additional appreciation for stuff like this that is so well thought out, right? And especially when we're talking about an anthology series where each episode is different, that's also its own basically mini movie, right? That's a 25-minute movie every week. And so that to me was really cool and appealing and spooky and weird, and I don't know, just all that kind of weird spooky stuff. I have a feeling we were all weird kids,
Me?
So,
no way.
Nope.
I'm definitely
Super
not still
normal.
talking about stuff that I watched when I was a child and really freaked me out. By the way, rewatching this, I had weird dreams last night. I'm just going to throw it out there. I had like very Twilight Zone dreams. So thanks, Caleb.
That's awesome.
Thanks for that.
Anytime.
Well, Caleb, can you give us a little backstory on Rod Serling and his creation of Twilight Zone?
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep this brief, but his life story is really fascinating, and I'm only going to go up until the Twilight Zone TV show. But basically, Serling grows up in a small town, a really idyllic childhood. He's got a great family life. He's especially enamored of his father, really great dad. He's really extroverted, really well liked in school. World War II hits. He enlists in the military the day after he graduates from high school in 1945. He really wants to be a paratrooper for some weird reason. He achieves that goal, and his unit is immediately in some of the worst combat zones of that era. It's really a pretty hellish experience, and some of the stories from his military days are pretty horrific. His father also dies while he is overseas. He's not allowed to go home even for the funeral. His father was only 52 and died of a heart attack. Coincidentally, the same thing that Serling himself would die of at age 50 later. So they both went super young. I think it was a passed down kind of condition. So he basically turned to writing after he came home from the war to combat his PTSD and as a form of self-therapy. He had done some writing while he was overseas, but nothing really serious. So he just writes and writes and writes, and he becomes a really respected, critically acclaimed author of radio dramas and some early TV plays. And something to keep in mind is at the time, in the mid-50s and late 50s, TV was not seen as a medium for much other than game shows, sitcoms, just sort of light fare, except for these 90-minute, basically televised plays that Serling wrote a lot of. And at the time, he really had a reputation for being the master. When anybody would say, "Oh, television's just for kids; it's just fluff entertainment," CBS could say, "Here's Rod Serling. Look at this. This is the possibility of the medium. It can be serious. It can be thought-provoking. It can affect social change." And he really believed in all that too. When he announced that he was going to be doing the Twilight Zone, critics thought that it was kind of crazy because sci-fi at that time wasn't seen as worthwhile. It was cheap thrills and monsters and aliens and drive-in fare. So everybody was pretty surprised that this guy who's so well known for these dramatic, probing the current issues, sort of 90-minute television films, was going to sort of like sell out and do this kids show stuff. And because of his experiences with censorship in some of his plays, he basically fought really hard for creative control on Twilight Zone. And despite the fact that in interviews he said, this is just fantasy, this is science fiction, I'm not going to get into any social commentary, anything like that. Basically, that was to throw censors off the trail so they wouldn't pay much attention to it. And in fact, his intention was to absolutely get into those issues and get into, political and social climate of the time, and try to examine it in a way that would kind of sneak in under the radar. Twilight Zone starts in 1959 and runs until 1964. I think there's 156 episodes, but that's sort of his origin story there.
Which it's so funny that I didn't know all of that background, and even just watching those handful of episodes that I watched, the past few days, everything that you just said is there in the material. Like, it's so present, and those themes of, I think loneliness is a recurring theme that comes up quite a bit. The isolation of humanity and sort of what it does, but then also even taking, the pilot episode and having it be kind of turned on its head in the fourth act of sort of, this military man being kind of prepared to go up to space. And at the time that was scary, and we didn't know what was going to happen in space and all that. Like, everything that you just said fully tracks for me with every episode that I've seen so far. So that's really cool that he was able to kind of take all of that trauma, and anguish, and kind of turn it into something that was so palatable, but also, like you said, so thought-provoking in a time where the medium was not respected in that way. I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
We got a couple people chiming in here, so shout out to Trevor. Thank you so much for jumping in here.
That's my
Love
brother.
The Twilight Zone. Aw, hi Trevor. Liz Merriman too says thank you to Caleb for that history. I gotta say,
Sure.
that was fascinating.
Yeah,
It's
that
cool
was
to hear,
great.
to hear about his backstory. And I mean, with screenwriting, they say, like, write what you know. So having him funnel that energy away from the trauma of his experience and put it into this, more tangible thing, this show that's not leaning into like the negativity of his trauma, but twisting it into creativity as a catharsis is really, really fascinating. There was something you said, Caleb, that made me think of a topic that we were kind of getting into earlier. The fact that Rod Serling was known for the televised play style, and that was popular in the 50s. I think that kind of folds into a question that I had of why this show went with a single cam style instead of a multicam style. So I wish I had a picture here. I should have pulled this up. But for folks tuning in who are not familiar with those terms, multicam is kind of what you think of for a traditional sitcom in how it's filmed. So usually you have like a set, you have a live studio audience, and then, 3 or 4 cameras kind of set up, and they switch back and forth between the cameras in the same take. So
Friends is like a perfect example of like a classic multicam.
Exactly. Big Bang Theory, I know, is another one that comes to mind that's that.
How I Met Your Mother, even too. Yeah.
I Love Lucy, one more back in that time. And that's kind of the era where I believe they started taking off because it was a less expensive way to shoot versus single cam. Even though that, I got to say, that name is very misleading because it's not shot with usually a singular camera. But it's just done more in the Hollywood feature film style. So you probably have 2 cameras so you get some more coverage, or maybe it is 1 camera, but it's just not in the sound studio per se with a live audience and multiple cameras that are catching the whole thing and just switching back and forth. Single cam allows you for you can get close-ups, you can do point of view shots, you have 360 degrees theoretically that you can be shooting. So it's a much more dynamic shot, but it is, or not shot, style, it is much more expensive though too. But the fact that you said that he has the experience with the televised plays, I feel like that's what sitcoms sort of are, because yes, you have the audience there and you kind of have the stage. And the actors, when they get to do multicam, it's as though they're doing a play production, right? So they get to act it out and kind of riff off each other, and you have 4 cameras that are getting all this coverage of it. So it's more of that performing arts, like a live style, versus, oh shoot, we got that close-up wrong, let's take it again. But not to say you can't like retake with a multicam. It's just, you know, you're capturing a little more live energy and off the cuff kind of stuff. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that? What do you think if they would have gone with a multicam style of this? Would we have lost the vibe? Would it have been a totally different experience, or, you know, take away, add to it? What do you guys think?
Well, I know that Serling just wanted to make the highest quality program that he could. He basically wanted, you know, at film quality in a 30-minute television experience, which didn't exist at that point at all. It's one of the reasons he was a trailblazer, because he felt like he could bring the power of a 90-minute feature film to a half an hour on television at a time when, like I said, people just dismissed TV as just kind of like a fluff medium, that it, you know, couldn't be a vehicle for real ideas or real change or anything like that. So, I mean, to the point that he was criticized a lot because he did constant advertisements. He promoted products. He would take any money that he could to funnel into the Twilight Zone so that he could not cut corners, and he could present the highest quality programming and not just sort of wing it, I guess.
That's cool. I didn't know that. But also,
he also
really
put a lot of his own money into it too. I think he owned half the show at a lot of times, where his personal financial health was at stake, basically, if the show succeeded or failed. He believed in it that much.
well,
It
and
definitely feels like a passion project like that.
Well, especially because every episode is so unique, right? And it's not necessarily topics that even now we would have really thought to bring up, right? So the idea that you would have standards and practices or somebody like that censoring something or anything, you know, because the S&P can kind of come in anywhere and cut some stuff. That's a way that independent filmmakers kind of get around that too, right? Is that you can't be told what to do by a studio if you're financing your own stuff. So it makes a lot of sense that he would do that to also keep the voice kind of singular throughout. You know, even though I'm sure that there were other writers on the show, him being that sort of, you know, the money, but then also the showrunner, and then also the face of the show, to where his brand was kind of also intertwined with the brand of the show. That makes a lot of sense to me. But in terms of the single cam, we kind of talked about this before we hopped on mic, but my initial gut response to that would just be, I think it also allowed for a much easier way to build tension, because so much of the show was really about the audience not having a God's eye point of view, which oftentimes in film, right, we as the audience can know and see things maybe that our main protagonists don't know or don't see yet, because we're getting multiple, you know, layers of stories. We're cutting back and forth in between stuff. This didn't really happen except through Rod Serling, right? And his exposition as he would kind of pop in, which we also talked about, it didn't really kind of start happening until after the first season, because in the first season it was more of just his VO, and we didn't see him and his physical presence. As the seasons progressed and as the episodes, you know, kind of found their footing even more, I think the only real exposition that we got that wasn't just what we were seeing as the protagonist was through him. And so I think about the pilot as a main example of this. Is we are with this one person pretty much the whole episode until the very last few scenes. And so to kind of only see what he's seeing, to kind of only feel what he's feeling. There's this great shot that they do when he kind of runs into the phone booth in the middle of the town square because he hears the phone ringing. And he goes to answer it, and also immediately hangs up because he wants to get a hold of the operator. And I was like, bro, what are you doing? But there's this great panning shot where it's him looking through all of the panes of glass of the phone booth, and it's basically a 360 pivot, but we are never given more than what he can see. It's a really tight frame. It's a really tight point of view. There's not a lot, and so rewatching that episode last night, I literally turned to my husband. I was like, oh, like I got so like hyped because I was scared. I felt that tension. I was then in his place as the person who can only see what he's seeing. And so I really think that there was probably, if I had to guess, that was probably part of it as well, is just kind of always making sure that the audience didn't see more than what, the writers and the showrunner intentionally wanted them to see in that moment, which was almost always only the information that our protagonist had in real time. And I think that that's also one of the successes in terms of the world building for each episode, because if you think about it, 25 minutes is not a lot of time to create a believable landscape. And every episode I rewatched, I was in it. I was there. I believed it. I was with the protagonist. And so I'm assuming that the camera work was probably intentional in that way as well, because I don't think you would have gotten that same tension if you were able to cut back or see a wide and then see, because all of that then just gives you more visual exposition and puts you ahead of the protagonist in these small incremental ways. And I don't think it would have been as rewarding, right? Every payoff of every episode wouldn't have been rewarding if we knew that something was coming. All we knew is what Rod Serling wanted to tell us. And I think that was just such a cool artistic choice. And also spooky. Like, it just added to the spookiness. You don't know what's going to happen. It was crazy. That phone booth shot legit freaked me out. And also, I just have to say this because I don't know if we'll get back to it. That episode, and then the Nick of Time episode that had oh my God, thank you, William Shatner, pre-Shatner voice. He wasn't doing any weird affectations. Right. Both of those were shot on the Warner Brothers backlot, which also is where the town square for Back to the Future was. It also was Stars Hollow in Gilmore Girls, and the diner that we see right here in Nick of Time was actually Luke's diner. They just redid it. So if you go back and you look at it, and any Gilmore Girls fans watching, I'm sure there's a lot of crossover between Twilight Zone and Gilmore Girls. Hey, listen, I'm right there with you. Also, I can't really spoil a lot for Caleb because he's not through Gilmore Girls yet. So this will be a spoiler-free exposition. But if you look at the architecture of this building and this particular set, it's actually Luke's diner that they've just kind of redesigned the interior of. And fun fact, when I was working as a background actor in Los Angeles, I worked on this lot a few different times. And I once had to do background holding for a show in between scenes in this diner. And I walked in, and most of the time, background actors just want to find a place to, charge their phone or whatever, myself included. I walked in and I was like, you guys, the diner, like, and they were like, yeah, it's cool, it's like a diner set. And I literally was like the only one in like a group of 30 people that was like freaking out, because to be fair, for me it was Luke's diner because they had just, I think, shot the reboot of Gilmore Girls, so it had still kind of a bit of that dressing. But yeah, this is a very famous backlot, and if you pay attention to things that you're watching, you end up seeing this particular town square crop up quite a bit. In the pilot, they do a panning around, and you see the building that eventually will have the clock tower in Back to the Future. And it's Stars Hollow as well. So just a fun fact for all those Gilmore Girls stands out there.
Well, it's worth, anyone listening who's interested, it's really worth looking up, because the list of things that were shot there is insane. I mean, it's not just those, it's like a mile long as far as like movies, TV shows. It's crazy. And then you start thinking about it, you're like, oh yeah, I guess that is the town square in Gremlins. Like, it's so weird.
Well,
so
even
cool.
just like little teen drama shows that,
Yeah.
there are things I did background on that I can't even tell you the name. Can't even remember because so much TV can kind of get produced and then never really see the light of day. And I remember the town square and like the clock tower building was like a high school or something. And then people were walking in and out, so that particular landscape of that exterior shows up a lot, and they just kind of change the face of stuff, which is really kind of cool and fun. And every time I see it, I'm always like, hey, that's cool. I've been there. And I was not cool the first time I got to work on that set. I was legit freaking out like the whole time. And people were like, okay, relax. And I was like, but you guys, he skateboarded right here. Like, this is where Biff had his car accident. Like, I just couldn't stop. So much like right now.
I would have been the same way though. Well, and I'm glad that you brought up William Shatner too, because one of the other points I was going to make to bring it back to the multicam versus single cam is Star Trek, both the original series and then the Next Generation too, being done in that multicam style, because somebody might say, oh, they probably stayed away from multicam because that's synonymous with sitcom, because you want the audience and the laughter and that kind of thing. But here's an example of something that's not comedy based, or at least not intentionally, if you're watching the OG series, that's done that way. But I feel like with multicam, the perspective too is like a little bit wider, it's not as intimate. It's not super tight shots all the time. Not to say they don't include them sometimes, but for the most part, it's supposed to be kind of taken in, again, like an audience watching a theatrical production. But yeah, I think, Virginia, one of the other points that you said earlier with the kind of leaning into the single cam thing was the world building. I think the single cam certainly helps that you can visually build worlds quickly and kind of get the message out through these different shots very quickly. But man, that really speaks to his writing. So tight that you can, and we're talking, this is an episodic series. This is not serialized. So that means that you can jump into any episode, and that's why Caleb gave a whole bunch of different episodes to watch. You can just like throw it a dart at a dartboard, and kind of pick one. Means that you don't need to know what happened in the previous one to jump in. Is it helpful? Are there occasionally callbacks or some fun stuff like William Shatner being in a couple different episodes, little Easter eggs, sure. But storyline, no, it's not a linear narrative that way.
I just have a quick question for both of you guys, by the way.
Yeah.
Do you think that people were as attractive as they were in the 50s because they smoked cigarettes? Because that seemed to be prevalent in all the episodes. And I am not kidding when I tell you that, I'm thirsty currently for this photo of William Shatner. He was
I was
so
literally
attractive.
going to say you have to change the slide because
please, I get distracted because I'm looking at his cheekbones.
We'll go to that one.
But even this woman, her and the other guy at the end of that episode, I was oh my God. They literally got someone that looked almost identical to Marilyn Monroe, and then they got someone that looked almost identical to James Dean. And I was like, these people are
beautiful.
Hot. They're so hot.
Right.
And I think it's probably the smoking. So really, anybody watching this,
That's it.
I guess get back into cigarettes because
I think it is it is the smoking, but unfortunately, their bodies completely disintegrated at age 65.
Right.
So
not worth it, folks. Not worth it.
Inner beauty wasn't really a thing back then because your lungs were disintegrating. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how the Twilight Zone had a major influence on more modern cinema and TV. Where do we see that impact or influence? Caleb, you want to take that one?
I mean, just the idea of using the platform of fantasy or sci-fi as social commentary, or being able to talk about issues that might be too controversial in other realms. That kind of originates with Twilight Zone. That kind of is the blueprint for that. And now we see that all over the place. We're so used to it. It's hard to imagine a time in 1959 where that was really, really radical, to the point that sometimes people weren't even understanding that they were learning, or that they were, having their minds expanded in this way. But other than that concept, I mean, obviously you've got things today, I mean, the most obvious one, other than the current reboot of Twilight Zone, would be Black Mirror. And although Black Mirror is more fear of technology based, I guess, it's still, the natural successor. But you've also got people like M. Night Shyamalan. You've got J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof creating Lost. I know that for Damon Lindelof, Twilight Zone is his favorite show of all time. Same thing, Richard Kelly, Donnie Darko, writer-director. Chris Carter creating the X-Files, huge Twilight Zone vibes with X-Files. And obviously Jordan Peele, who's involved in the Twilight Zone current reboot, and director of Get Out and Us. And I'm not sure if you guys know, but Us was directly inspired by the Twilight Zone episode Mirror Image from, I think, season 5. It's one of my favorites, but that was one that he saw as a kid, and it just triggered something in his brain. And decades later, he wrote Us with that in mind. So
I would also
seems like it definitely seems like a Twilight Zone episode. It's so cool.
Yeah,
Love
it's
that
so
movie
good.
much.
Also way scarier than you think it's going to be, just as a side note. I would also say Room 104 by Mark Duplass, which is on HBO, would also be kind of a spiritual successor as well, because similarly it's episodic, but every episode takes place in Room 104 of this particular hotel. So the idea is that the room itself is almost a Twilight Zone or something to that effect. But also every episode is like self-contained. So I think we see this kind of storytelling a lot. I would even say also to a lesser degree, but in some ways like American Horror Story having, kind of anthology style seasons, right? Like it's not each episode, but each season kind of rebooting from the beginning again, and also having their own elements, especially season 1 of American Horror Story with Murder House was probably something that, I haven't heard Ryan Murphy talk about it explicitly, but I can see a lot of those parallels as well, because in that particular season, the house itself is what is sort of keeping a lot of the spirits there, right? Like the whole vibe is like, if you died there, then you can live on. And so there's even one episode where like a character is like almost dying, and they pull him back onto the lawn of the house so that they can kind of live on, So I think we see this a lot in terms of influence, and but also that idea of social commentary being peppered within horror or sci-fi, or just a completely like fictional world, right? Like oftentimes I think it's easier for us, and I'm speaking for myself, I think it's sometimes easier to digest heavier themes, heavier concepts when it is fed to us through something that feels familiar. And even though it is like a fictional world, in a way, there is that ability to suspend reality, to suspend disbelief a little bit, because okay, I'm in the Twilight Zone. Things that happen here, it's like Vegas, right? It's like what happens here stays here. But in that way, it's like the buy-in has already happened. But then all these other things that we're kind of getting fed ethically, morally, the ambiguity of life and stuff like that. At least for me, I feel like it's a much more palatable concept to kind of digest when it's being fed to me through this cool, one-off kind of short film, short play, I keep going back to Nick of Time, because I just feel like of the ones that I rewatched, it was kind of the most incisive in terms of really hammering in like the uncertainty of life is kind of what makes it worth living. And I think that that's something that we can all really, I don't know, I'm projecting, but for myself, that was one that was very, it hit home really deeply, because especially now that I have a child, there's so much of my life now that is just fully driving to protect him and make sure that he is, not just like dive bombing Mick Foley style off the couch and cracking his face open. If he does it, it needs to be onto a cushion and a pillow, and a person. And so I think that particular episode was really powerful because I think we can all relate to this idea of, I don't know, it being easier if there was a blueprint, it being easier if there was actually a little napkin holder that told us answers to what our futures would have. But then in that, his wife at the end kind of pulling him back and being like, yeah, you could sit here and do this the whole time, but like, I think the part of the adventure is not knowing. You can choose, you can manifest your own future. And I think that stuff like that is timeless, right? That is why this show still, to quote myself, slaps, because it's still those emotional touch points 60 years later are still really hitting,
And we'll get into whether or not the show ages well in just a second, but I wanted to touch on the concept of this being a good platform for social commentary. Why do you guys think that, I guess, sci-fi and, I don't know, this style of story really stuck with people in this time? Why did it work? Because it's a bit out there, he trailblazed with this. Not to say that clearly it's not the first sci-fi ever or weird story, but it's very, very unique, and so many people pulled inspiration from this later, as we talked about. But why, at this point, we're getting into the 60s, were people drawn to it? Caleb, what do you think?
Well, I mean, Serling, above all, was hopeful and respected the intelligence of his audience. He wanted people to be smarter about things, and he wanted people to enjoy more quality entertainment, which is why he made this show. But I think that you see a lot of the reality of the time sort of being shattered in people's lives, or starting to feel like it wasn't necessarily what they had thought, being mirrored in a lot of these episodes. Even though the show ends just about at the point, I think it ends before the JFK's assassination and things like that, but it's still a tumultuous time when people are really worried about a lot of threats from overseas, and the sting of World War II is still really in people's minds. And we think of the 50s as this really idyllic time, but I think that the larger fears were always in the back of people's minds. And to get some catharsis by watching Twilight Zone, or be have the provocation of some of these ideas, just speaks to the intelligence of the audience, and it kind of elevates what people their capacity for enjoying entertainment like this.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. You mentioned like the fear of overseas and that sort of thing, and we saw there was like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. What's the other one? The Day the Earth Stood Still, I think. Didn't the original come out around the 50s? Because we're kind of riding off that wave of McCarthyism and the Red Scare in the 40s and 50s. So there is that suspicion. And even though some of these episodes are very on the nose with that kind of topic, and we'll get into themes and stuff later too, talking about media having social commentary buried in the subtext of it. Rear Window is a movie that I like to analyze from that perspective too, of McCarthyism as like the undertone of it, because he's, curious about his neighbors and jumping to conclusions and, that kind of thing. So I would imagine this was kind of a startling show, because you're coming out of McCarthyism. Hopefully the dust is kind of settling there. We're coming out of World War II. We're not quite into the Vietnam War. As you said, it's an idyllic time, so the American dream is ever present, and it makes sense that his childhood was that kind of childhood, like a good neighborhood, a happy home. He loved his dad, that. He went off to be a soldier. And you see that in this. Let me see if I can pull up, like, I mean, so many shots within the series just like scream kind of beautiful, American dream, wonderful. The kids that you see are like, oh, these are bad. There we go. So like this, you know, smiling, happy, whatever. So you have these like glimpses of it, but it's buried in this, like the weird story going on, the supernatural stuff or the sci-fi kind of elements, which I think is just very fascinating. But how do you guys think this holds up? Does the show age well? Do you think that if you pop this on for, you know, a teenager, wherever age appropriate, do you think they would be drawn in and appreciate it like we do?
I mean, I would hope so. Like I was saying before we hopped on mic, like I rewatched a bunch of these episodes, but it had been truly like so long since I had seen them that it almost felt like it was like a first time watching, right? And I'm clearly not a teen, but I think that there's so much of this that really just transcends the time period. I will say, just to kind of like have a tiny little part of that last question too, like we landed on the moon with Apollo 11, the United States, in 1969. So right around this time too was when NASA was like popping off. So, and I think that that's the scientific term. It was popping off. So we had a lot of funding as a country that was going into the space race, and we were kind of neck and neck with Russia and the cosmonauts a lot too. So I think that there was also so much of the unknown there that obviously is echoed in the pilot, but then also even if you think about like Midnight Sun, you know, and this idea that the Earth could suddenly be out of orbit and stuff like that, I think that that probably played a lot into the format kind of leaning a little bit more towards sci-fi and that unknown of space as well. But all of that being said, yeah, I think that it doesn't really matter that it was like period appropriate and reflected what was happening in the late 50s, early 60s, because even watching it now in 2020, you know, and you showed a still of it, Time Enough Now or something like that with the guy with the Coke bottle glasses. That one hit. That was a rough one to watch. Again, just being aware, ever present, I think, of our own mortalities, the older that we get, you kind of have this idea of, you know, if I only had time, I would do X, Y, and Z. And I don't know about y'all, but with the pandemic in particular, having to force us all to kind of slow down, there's been so much stuff that's been on my to-do list that if only, and I have gotten none of it done because I've just been trying to keep my mental health above water most of the time during all of this, because the reality is that we're kind of globally going through the trauma of what it is to be dealing with a pandemic, right? And the fear of, you know, if I go to the grocery store at the wrong time, will I contract this like potentially deadly virus? You know what I mean? So I think that themes like that, and in this particular episode, spoiler alert, homie in Act 1 is just like not a great employee. He's like reading on the job, you know, literally like working at a bank, like behind his little teller window, like reading his books, and people are like getting annoyed with him. His wife kind of seems like, I don't want to use the B word, but like she's kind of a B word, just like snatching newspapers out of his hands and scribbling all in his poetry books and tricking him into trying to read to her, which I thought was the meanest part of all of it. Like, girl, just be mean. Don't try to trick him and be like, will you read to me from your book? And he was so excited to read to her. And then he opened up his book and she had scribbled all in it like a psychopath. And basically what ends up happening is, you know, he goes down the next day, however many days later, and on his break goes to the bottom of the bank vault to like read in peace, because he's always being disrupted. He can never read. There's never time for him to read. And while he's down at the bank vault, basically a bomb hits where he's living. And the only reason that he survived is because he's in this like steel, they're made of steel, right? I don't know, metal fortress of a bank vault, right? So then when he emerges from underground, he realizes everyone he knows and everyone around him is dead and gone. gone from this bomb. And you see him in this still walking around in the rubble, and then he picks up a revolver. He kind of has this idea that he'll, off himself, and he's talking to himself this whole time, by the way. There's a lot of like characters talking to themselves in these episodes, and he kind of is echoing that it's the loneliness, it's the isolation that's the hardest part of all of this, And then he stumbles upon the ruins of a library, and oh my God, all these books. Are you fucking kidding me? Look at all these books. I'm gonna read all of them. He stacks them all up. And he's got this month, this month, this month, this month. Stoked as hell. Sorry, I just said the F word and the H word and the P word all at the same time. Who knows? But then it gets to the last scene, and he bends down to pick up his book, and his glasses break.
Man, I want to cry so hard when that happened. I felt so bad for him.
It was awful, but then what a great present reminder, right? That like these things that we're kind of always like trying to make time for, if only, life can change in a second, right? So it's not just that this bomb fell and decimated everything that he knew. It's all of a sudden this one joy, this one solace he found in and amongst all of that rubble was gone in a second. And then they give you this POV shot of what his vision looks like without his glasses. And he can't even see his real hand in front of his face, to be honest. It is poor vision. You can tell even in this still how intense those glasses are. And so it was just ones with themes like that, to be quite honest, were like jarring in a way that I think are so universal that I would be interested in even having this conversation 20 years from now when it is 80 years old, and 100 years old, and to see if these themes are things that carry on. But to Rod Serling's immense credit as a writer, I think that those themes, isolation, self-preservation, nostalgia, right? Like all of these themes that we keep kind of hitting on over and over and over again in these episodes, I think that that's just part of the general human struggle. It's the general practice of what it is to be a human, is to learn and learn and learn and learn these lessons as many times as we can, or unlearn, right? These things that we had been practicing for a long time that turned out not to be healthy, And so for me anyway, 10 out of 10, would watch, gonna watch continually after all this, because I didn't watch all of Caleb's exhaustive list. But it's something, at least, I mean, I would encourage anybody that's watching this that's younger, that hasn't seen it, don't let the like black and white medium kind of stop you. I don't think that maybe that would stop people, but I also know that some people, get kind of stopped by like subtitles and things like that. If you can kind of get past these barriers of the formats that and are comfortable with, same to be said for foreign films and television, right? If you can get past, what did Bong Joon-ho say? If you can get past the 1-inch barrier of a subtitle, you have just like an entire world in front of you of incredible films. And I think the same could be said for watching things that are in black and white. But also, don't recolorize things that are in black and white. I'm looking at you, I Love Lucy. No one cares about the color of those dang grapes. They were shot in a medium that didn't have color, so they were lit for the medium that didn't have color. When you recolorize these things, you are eliminating the work that all of these cinematographers and all of these lighting gaffers and all of these people have put in because they lit for the medium that they had. They weren't making do with just not having color. That was not around then. That was a really intense
preach, girl, preach.
I'll calm it down, but we don't need to colorize these things, because in absentia of those technological advances, the art form that was created with that in mind. So what we are seeing, the lighting we're seeing, the camera angles that we're seeing was so intentional that to, I think, colorize them for our convenience is rude, and we shouldn't do it. So
that's so true, though. I think that's a really good thing to note, and hopefully nobody is deterred by it being in black and white, because we still see modern films that are in black and white. I mean, Mad Max, Fury Road, they did the black and chrome version. The Artist, even though that's supposed to be like a modern silent film, still black and white. And there's a lot of other stuff out there. I think even Parasite was re-released in black and white, if I'm not
nice.
mistaken. But so to bring it back to that question, the overarching question of has this show aged well? Anything that aged really well or didn't age so much? I don't know. Caleb, what do you think about it? Do you think it stands up?
Well, here's what's aged the worst. We'll get this out of the way first. Serling did have and not that he wrote every episode, we should bring that up too, which is one of my points. Serling, Richard Matheson, and Charles Beaumont wrote something like 127 episodes, but there were a lot of other writers along the way too. Serling being sort of more of the showrunner before that term even really existed. But he did have a tendency to want to throw a couple of comedic episodes, some light comedy episodes in every season. Those are not my favorite. They have some good points. They have some interesting ideas. They have some interesting twists even. But I don't think I put any of them on my lists just because I tend to watch those the least. If you're, I would check them out. What's a good one? I don't know. There's a like The Mighty Casey is kind of like a light comedy sports thing. That's a good one, but again, it's just that they're miles away from the darker or the more social commentary oriented episodes. The other thing is the time period, the late 50s. There's some archetypal characters that were really hit hard there that don't really exist in modern day, or that younger audiences I don't think would even really understand what they were. Things like boxers, bookies, the pool shark character, those are very 50s, and they really haven't translated to today. So I think it'd be hard for someone coming into it cold.
I don't know. I think that a lot of those teen rom-coms have a girl that pretends like she doesn't know how to play pool to get the hot guy at school to teach her how to play pool. So
that's true.
I think that's carried through.
So some of those, you kind of have to look at that and go, okay, it's 1960, like that. But I mean, for what's aged the best, like Virginia was saying, I think it's just the timelessness of the quality of writing. And really, in rewatching too, you remember that, oh, this is a good episode, or you remember an image from it. But it's shocking, even in Blu-ray HD quality, to see how amazing some of these episodes look, how amazing some of the makeup was, how beautiful the cinematography was. The direction is just insane in some of these episodes, where you just think for 24 minutes they had to keep this thing going. Good example is like Eye of the Beholder. The director, Douglas Hayes, he's got for about, I think, 20 minutes, he's basically got to show what's going on without showing any faces, including the main character who's all bandaged up. Like, how would you do that these days? How would, the reveal is what everybody remembers, but you forget that it's just as compelling for those earlier scenes where you don't see any faces and you think, why are we not seeing this information? But so some of that stuff. But as far as the timelessness of the topics, I mean, if you want to go through a checklist of what some of the themes and issues that are dealt with in this 1959 to 1963 series, we're talking climate change, we're talking racism, xenophobia, fear of technology, nuclear war, space exploration. Are those current issues at all, or are we just kind of like we solved all those? Do we do it?
Yeah, they're all solved. There's literally nothing going on right now. Definitely not those topics.
What did Tina Fey say at the Golden Globes a few years ago? She was like, and Selma was about the civil rights movement, which is totally fine now, and everything is great.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, other than just the general high quality of the show, I would be surprised if any new watcher wasn't hit with some of those same things, or could see the immediate parallels between the 60-year-old show talking about McCarthyism to 2020 and some of the xenophobic things that are thrown around now.
So to pose a question, I guess I'll throw this at Caleb, but Virginia, feel free to jump in here. So if we're talking about the show being a little dated, right? If we're showing this to a teenager who's like, ugh, I don't want to watch something black and white. I can't relate with anybody on screen because it's not, what I see in my everyday life. It seems like the solution to that, because this show or series has so many great topics to it, as Caleb just mentioned, it seems like the solution would be, well, let's do a reboot and modernize it, right? Which I know Jordan Peele has done that, and I haven't watched any of it. I'm assuming it's out. So I can't speak to that, and we're not about to necessarily like bash it or praise it unless you really want to. But do you think that that would be a good thing? Like, does the show need a reboot, and would that help it, or would it take away from some of the preciousness about the original series?
Well, and actually, sidebar, there have been 2 reboots of Twilight Zone before the Jordan Peele. There was an 80s or 90s, and there was a 2002 extremely short-lived reboot of Twilight Zone. But I actually just recently finally watched a few episodes of the new reboot Twilight Zone, and I guess maybe because I was expecting to kind of not like it, I was pleasantly surprised. I thought they were actually really good, and I really enjoyed them, and I'll watch more for sure. But to me, the rebooting is unnecessary because part of the feeling, the vibe of Twilight Zone that I got into as a kid is the black and white, is the Rod Serling intro and outro, it is the theme music, it's the sense of being dropped into this slightly different universe where you don't have your footing, that I think works. I mean, it always worked for me because it's like, oh, I'm never going to be able to experience the early 60s. But, it feels as weird and alien to me as this show is and this universe is. So, I'm never a huge fan of solving the problems of teenagers by rebooting television shows. And also, I could never be a teacher because if a kid didn't like it because it was black and white or couldn't get into it because it was old, I would probably just flunk them. I don't know.
Definitely don't
teach
that. Because
yeah.
That's how a lot of students are. Virginia, what do you think? Do you agree with Caleb, or do you have different thoughts on whether or not it needs a reboot?
I mean, it's hard because I think that in general, I would lean with Caleb and say that I don't think most things need a reboot. The exception to that rule being the new Jumanji films. They were actually really good. And I similarly went into them being like, okay, relax. The first Jumanji had Robin Williams. And then both of those movies were actually very well done. The writing was really smart. The acting choices were really smart. Shout out to friend of the show, Sedarius Blaine, who's in all of those as well. But there are always exceptions to the rule, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. But in general, yeah, I would side with Caleb. I don't think it's necessary, if for no other reason than, God, let's just give new creators a chance to create new things. Let's stop funneling this studio money, this network money, which is where all of this comes from, right? We've seen time and again, especially within the last 20 years, and the advent and rise of studios that we all love, like A24, right? Like we just talked about The Witch last month for Cinema Lab, and it's like that's the kind of stuff I think we should be elevating. Those are the kind of chances I think we should be taking, especially in television as a medium, because it is something that nowadays is so much more familiar to people. R.I.P. Quibi, and the 10-minute platform that was gone. I feel like I saw advertising about Quibi for longer than Quibi was actually around. And part of that could be the pandemic, absolutely. But I think there's also, I don't know, large studios, large networks, we have this pattern of continuing to just do something until it's annoying to us, or until it's a turn off to us. And so my yes and to that would be there's always going to be exceptions to the rule where things end up being good on their own, right? And I think the argument can be made that the Jumanji films are not remakes, they're sequels. So anybody that's in the comments about to get mad at me right now. I know it's a sequel. But I also think there's just so much original content that people are dying to get made, that in that place, I would just like to see something that's a spiritual successor to this show, something that's heavily influenced by this show, which I think, you said it before, Black Mirror is a real present one that people can kind of reference. But like, you can't tell me that there aren't 30 kids that have a good pilot script and a show Bible within a rock throwing distance of that Warner Brothers backlot right now. Mm-hmm. So in that, let's, as a society, let's start championing a lot of these more independent things. And that can be a whole other soapbox, but really the way that we do that, right, is by supporting the shows that are independent, supporting the shows that maybe are on smaller networks but have good word of mouth, supporting your friends' things when they come out, right? If we're all creators and content creators, you don't have to buy your friend's thing on Amazon, but even just sharing about it, talking about it, posting about it on your Instagram story, all of these metrics are now weight that is carried into these meetings with, development presidents and heads. If we want to start seeing more original content and not just reboots on reboots on reboots, let's start supporting it on the ground level, and all of that then ripples and waves into, these larger studios and networks, because really they follow the audience, they follow the money, because they know that that's where the advertising dollars are. And Caleb mentioned it earlier. I'm now curious to go see if I can find some of the things that, Rod Serling shilled for, because if the point is to get money so that you can keep making your thing, you do what you got to do. Maybe you're doing a toothpaste commercial and it's, the Twilight Zone for your dentures. Who knows what it was, but
he did a lot of cigarette ads, I'll tell you that.
Oh,
not so much toothpaste, tooth killers.
Things that were browning your teeth. But to that point, I honestly, as terrible for you as cigarettes are, aside from making you look cool, I can't even fault him for that, because when you are so constricted by budget, by network regulations, you want to do what you can to get outside of that, to get the money to make what you need to make. And so I think the larger conversation kind of for me becomes as audiences, right, we need to continue to, on the ground level, start championing shows and things and representation that we want to see on screen. Because again, we've got a real diverse panel here of all white people, but the idea hopefully is also that the TV that we watch can be a reflection of the societies that we are a part of and the people that we are involved with in our day-to-day lives. And so I am, all of that being said, empirically happy that Jordan Peele, did do kind of a reboot. I did watch a few episodes. I watched the pilot with Kumail Nanjiani that I thought was pretty good. I'm excited to see what a second season will do, because I think, there'll probably be more footing underneath them, more of their own style that kind of pays homage to the original show, but then hopefully finds its own footing again.
The second season is out, and actually the reviews for a lot of the episodes in the second season were remarkably better than the first season.
That's good to know. See, now I just got to get CBS All Access again. They keep getting me because they did Picard, and now I got to watch Picard season 2 when that comes out. So you're getting me, CBS All Access.
Just use a different email and get the 7-day trial.
That's what I was going to do, but I just had a whole thing about supporting independent stuff. So I pay for things. I pay for content.
Sure.
What I do. But to that point, that's great because I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. But I'm also glad to hear that the reviews were more positive, because but that also, most first seasons of shows are never as good as the second or third seasons, right? So the more that it gets its own feet underneath it, I will be excited to see it keep going, because to that point, right, people might have come to the show through Jordan Peele more than the idea of a faint memory of what the Twilight Zone is based on something that their parents told them, you know. So, and in that could be a backdoor for them into watching the original as well. So again, there are exceptions to the rule. It's hard because in general, it's hard to just be like, no. But if I see, you know, one more freaking Transformers movie, I'm just gonna lose it.
And unfortunately, they make you watch those. They beam them right into your house. And
they do. It's like a
them.
1984 thing. Like every day, it just starts playing. It's on in the background, and if you don't check in every once in a while, you die.
Then it starts over, and then you get strapped in like Clockwork Orange, and then like open your eyes to watch it.
And it's just Michael Bay on the other end going, "I need this money." Yeah, so that was a really long answer to say sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't.
Right. Well, and just as a note, for reboots, like, yes, it does get exhausting to see the Land Before Time 24 or, you know, all the Transformer movies or all the Avenger movies. But the other part of that, too, is that studios own the copyrights to have the rights to produce these films. And usually they end up rebooting it when that copyright is coming to a close. So when they're about to lose the rights to the licensing for it, that's when they do a reboot. So it extends it without having to go through, you know, a different avenue for keeping the rights to stuff. So that is why we see a lot of reboots. But I think Virginia's got a very valid point that we should support more indie artists. And I think as much as some of us are not super fans of streaming platforms like Lord Netflix, they are good platforms for up-and-comers. You know, you can submit a Bible to Amazon for sure. I think Netflix accepts them too. And you can pitch. I mean, you can certainly do contests, screenwriting contests and whatnot online and go to different pitch fests. But it's neat that we have these virtual platforms that, yes, you don't get the same experience, but it might be a little bit, just a teeny bit easier for screenwriters and creatives to break into these fields because there are so many more platforms on top of the studios that are there. So I want to jump back to the social commentary kind of concept. And as Caleb mentioned earlier, there are so many different themes that are touched on in this series that are still relevant to all of us today. But something else that's unique with the Twilight Zone is how it leans into genres. So using genre as like a storytelling thing, you know, it's this like vehicle, I guess you could say. So before we get into that, just to break it down for anyone who's not super familiar with the concept of a genre or category versus a genre film. So yes, all films have genres, just like music does, or just like books do. But when you're talking about a genre film, it's something that leans very heavily into the tropes, the motifs, and the iconography of that genre. So, for example, you know, if we're talking a horror film, you're going to lean very heavily into the stuff that's super familiar about that genre. So if you think iconography, imagery that you see in a horror film, like a weapon, you know, a bloody knife or an old dark house or a monster in the basement, there are things like that that help kind of speed up the storytelling process, that you see them and your brain is like, oh yeah, you know, based on your culture and your society and the media you consume, you're like, oh yeah, cool, we're watching a horror film, so I don't need exposition to get me into it. Like, we're right there. Like, I accept the world that we're in. And with Twilight Zone, that was kind of something we got into of how quickly we're in the world. The world building happens like that, and you just accept whatever the rules are for the world. So that's what genre films are, and I feel like Twilight Zone episodes really lean into that style. So why do creatives use that like genre style storytelling to talk about taboo topics or heavy subjects or controversial issues? Caleb, I'm going to throw that one to you.
I mean, I think it's easier historically to sneak in more controversial subjects in a medium that people wouldn't be examining as closely. You know, a 24-minute episode of a TV series that most people think is just a monster of the week alien show is going to be looked at in this time period a lot differently than a major motion picture, by a well-known director with well-known stars in it. So I think that it's seen as harmless entertainment, and overlooked by censors and overlooked by people who are looking to kind of demonize some of these concepts that Serling is able to freely throw around and throw to the audience and let them decide what they think about it without, this real guiding, how to approach this issue that you might get in another platform.
Do we think that leaning into genre storytelling devalues the story? Because you could take a topic like, let's say, climate change, and you could watch a documentary that's very scientific, very information heavy.
Shout out to Al Gore.
I was just going to say, what is the name of? I am
Inconvenient Truth.
An Inconvenient Truth. Thank you. I was totally drawing a blank there. So you could watch a documentary like that, or Caleb, what's an example of an episode in Twilight Zone that gets into climate change?
Well, The Midnight Sun. But if you watch the Al Gore documentary, you don't get Lois Nettleton and her beautiful face. So that's one advantage.
Is she the youngest? Yeah, she's great.
So good in that episode.
So do you think that it devalues it if we're kind of burying the content within, the visuals of a genre? Do you think that it takes away from the significance of like relaying this message to the audience?
Well, I think the viewer is left to feel like they sort of discovered something in a situation like this, instead of it being telegraphed to them. And I think that that's, first of all, exciting to feel that you think, okay, I'm watching this thing, but what I think it's also telling me under the surface is X, Y, and Z. I figured that out. My brain is working here. So I think that might be more stimulating to a viewer than when they know that they're watching a documentary and they know what the purpose of the documentary is, and they better learn something and they better, do something after they watch it. They've got a mission. In this, it's like you're suggesting something and they're filling in the blanks on their own.
What do you think about that, Virginia? Do you feel the same way?
Yeah. I was just going to say,
the end.
Yeah, I really can't expand on it any better than he did. That I think that it's a Trojan horse, right? When you're able to process something on your own, even if theoretically it's like a choose your own adventure and there are options laid out for you on how you can process it. I think it's left up to the viewer to do that work, and I think that makes it more enjoyable for sure.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there's a lot of benefit to watching documentaries. This is not bashing it at all, but I think, even that concept of what Caleb was saying of like your brain is kind of solving the puzzle in this fictional world, even though there's a subtext of reality in there. And that's a big thing with training educators, is learning to teach kids to like solve the problem themselves, like critical thinking and problem solving skills. And you want to go for that aha moment because it engages the audience, it engages the student in the class to make them think, even if you kind of indirectly spoon fed them the answer, like planted the breadcrumbs, there we go, across as you went. It engages them. It's like a positive experience, like a positive reinforcement too. So I think that's another aspect of this, is as you're watching these episodes and you're like solving the mystery alongside the story, you're like, oh, I bet it's going to be that. And then it is that. Okay, yeah, I want to keep going. And it just like really sucks you in. All while the subtext of it is like, hey, by the way, climate change, you know what I mean? Like it's a very complex show. There are a lot of layers to it. Just a really fascinating concept. And for this to come out when, yes, film is around and we have great complex films, but TV, as Caleb mentioned earlier, at this point in history is not as complicated. You know, it's just supposed to be general entertainment. And so the fact that Rod Serling is like trailblazing into this super layered concept for entertainment and education is incredible, absolutely incredible. So, I mean, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't see the shows that we see today. I don't think that TV would be quite the same. This is very cinematic, very deep, very layered, you know what I mean? I think he is owed a lot more credit than he's probably given. The show, so amazing. Well, and to that note, why don't we kind of shift to, do you guys have any favorite episodes that, I know, Caleb, this is a loaded question for you, because anyone who's followed us on Facebook and seen his recommendations, it's like, okay, well, here's your first 10.
He just pulls out a scroll.
And then, it's like an accordion. Like, okay, if you like this one, then let's go this way. And there's like 50 more to watch here. You know, it just keeps going. But if you had to pick one episode to be your ultimate favorite, what would it be?
Surprisingly, I do have a favorite episode.
What? One singular episode?
Yeah, I really do. I mean,
this is a historic moment, folks.
That's Sophie's
Thanks.
choice of you. You did it.
My favorite episode is one that is almost never talked about, never referenced. It has a twist, but I don't know. I don't think it's very well known. It's called The Long Morrow. It's from season 5. Anyway, it's
Is this the right
5.
picture? I
Yeah.
believe. There we go.
I don't want to spoil it because I think that probably not a lot of people have seen it. It's one of the really, really dreamiest episodes of Twilight Zone. It's a very romantic episode. Basically, the setup is that this guy who you see in this ice block here, he's in the undetermined space force of the future, and they want to send him on a solo mission to explore a planet that might be an alternate Earth. And to do it, they're going to have to put him in suspended animation. And he says, okay, great, sign me up. Like, this is what I do. It doesn't matter. Like, shoot me out there. And they say, well, for you, it's going to seem like it takes just a moment, but you're going to age. It's going to take 40 years. So 40 years of your life is basically going to be gone on this voyage. And he's still, realizing the gravity of that. This is his work. This is what he does. He doesn't have any family. They selected him because he doesn't have any family. No significant other or children or anything like that. And then on the eve of his departure on this mission, he really unexpectedly meets a woman, and they fall in love, and they have about a month of this courtship before he's sent off into space. And then what happens at the end, the decision that both he makes and the decision that she makes in that period of time, is one of the greatest, weirdest twists I've ever heard of in any story. I think it just blows my mind to this day. As many times as I've seen it and as much as I've thought about it, I can't conceive of the mind of the person who wrote this or who thought of what these two people would do and the effect that it has on each of them at the end of the episode. It's really... there are a couple of clunky moments in it that you have to kind of look past, but just if you think about the concept of it after you've seen it, I promise you it's an all-timer. And I have a couple other favorites, but they're on my next steps list, which a lot of people are asking about, but you can find on the Wealthy Theater Facebook page. Just scroll down a little bit. I'll probably do, after we get done with this, I'll just put the full list up again for people to see. My top 10 was more like the ones where if people, maybe people who haven't even seen the Twilight Zone, you show them a picture of Burgess Meredith in the Coke bottle glasses with the book, and they go, oh, that's Twilight Zone. I know what that is, even if they've never seen it. Those 10 are like the really recognizable ones, the constantly referenced in pop culture ones, the ones that we saw parodied on Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes before we even saw the episode. And then the next steps are sort of I think the higher quality ones from sort of like a second tier. But yeah, my my favorite one personally is The Long Morrow.
It sounds like a cool one, and I don't think
I
I've
know.
seen that. So
I'm gonna go watch it after we're done.
yeah, definitely. Well, Virginia, what about you? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, so it's a very classic one, but Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, just because that was really the one that I had the most sense memory of as a child, even being removed from some of the other episodes and rewatching and being like, I know I saw the pilot, but I don't remember this. This one, the beats were so familiar. And gosh, even just looking at that still with that crazy makeup of that man on the window is great. But I like what it has to say about the idea of insanity in particular, much like Eye of the Beholder. This is an episode that really hits on this idea of perception and individual experience, right? And I also think it was really interesting that this particular episode kind of turned the trope of the sanitarium at this time on its head by making it be the husband who had the breakdown. A lot of times, when we would see things like this referenced, because it actually took from real life, sanitariums were largely used to kind of calm and sedate out of control women and
Those crazy women.
These broads, they're
What's going on with them?
It's just have a ham sandwich, doll, and lie down here. Are you on your period? It's like that kind of a mentality. So I appreciated that, right off the bat, the William Shatner character, who aside from being a smoke show, is kind of the sensitive one, right? He's the one that needs to be looked after in this. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of subversion of what we would have typically seen. But then also, and I don't feel like I'm particularly spoiling this ending for anybody, unlike Caleb's, which is more of a deep cut episode. The ending, obviously, it ends with the Shatner character sort of on the stretcher being pulled away, and the wife is kind of comforting him, but very much we as the audience are kind of feeling like, oh man, this dude cracked again. And he knows, and then what the audience knows through Rod Serling's exposition, and then what we pull away to see in this long shot is that he was right. And this whole time there was somebody there on the plane wing pulling up the panel, trying to mess it up and get in there. And the last shot of the episode is a wide that kind of pulls back. And as it pulls back, we see that there's a piece of the panel that's been like ripped back, and it's not all the way off, but and so there's something about the idea of sureness in oneself, right? Because even as the Shatner character is kind of being wheeled away on a stretcher, presumably back to a hospital, he's like, well, I know that in a couple days or in a day or however long it will take, like, people will know that I was right. And so there's something weirdly nostalgic, obviously, for me in that, but then there's also, I think, that idea of self-perception, our experiences being different, the way we see things being different, also gets echoed a lot in the series. And it's just a classic, right? It's such a classic in terms of scary jump moments when he opens that window curtain again, and then it's just there and it's that crazy face. I mean, that's things that now, maybe feel very old hat to us, but I imagine at the time, to Caleb's point, it was incredibly groundbreaking to see something like this scary, because this is a scarier episode. I'm not going to lie. Like, I've seen it a couple times, and rewatching it again, I was like, jumpy, and you have these moments because the tension is built so well. And so just all together, I think it's cool. But also, what a romantic time for airplanes, don't smoke right now, wait until we're up in the air, and the non-smoking sign is turned off, and everybody's wearing suits and nice clothes, to get on the plane, whereas now we see people just like in straight up pajamas, putting their bare feet on the back of a plane. It's been a minute since I've been on a plane, but that's always my number one gripe, is like there's somebody barefoot. inside a plane. Put a flop on. Come on, just a sandal.
Put a flop
something.
Put
Just
a flop on it.
cover that soul up,
It's still a really scary episode, even if you've seen it before, and
Yeah.
even for somebody seeing it and kind of laughing at the furry suit of the gremlin, I dare you to not feel creeped out hours later when you're going to bed at that weird
walk.
weird face and the weird movements. You can kind of laugh at it, but then later on, I promise you're going to be scared.
That was part of what my weird dreams were last night, you guys. It wasn't a gremlin per se, but and even now, as soon as I just thought about that, there's a movie called The Cell that Tarsem Singh directed, he also directed The Fall. Vincent D'Onofrio, an amazing character actor, is in it, and he plays a serial killer. They have to go into the mind of the serial killer. In one of his split personalities, there's a scene where he plays like a jester clown kind of vibe, and he comes out of the corner of the room lumbering in kind of the same way. And I'm not saying that was an acting choice that he made that was an intentional parallel, but what I'm saying is, to your point, Caleb, that kind of menacing physicality is always scary. I don't care if you've seen it before. I don't care if it's in black and white and that dude's face clearly looks like he's wearing massive prosthetic makeup. There's something terrifying about the way that is presented. And then, the Shatner character being the only one that can see it. I mean, how many times in our lives, again, to parallel it, is how many times in our lives have we had a moment that felt like a chill down our spine, but we were the only ones to experience it? And you look around to kind of have that moment where you're catching somebody else's eye to be like, did you see? And no one's around to see it. So you have then just had this moment that feels paranormal, feels supernatural, feels Twilight Zone-ish. And that is fully manifest in this episode. It's that man's worst fears have come to life, not only about the man on the plane, but potentially about himself, and I think that's where Twilight Zone does its best work is both for me and I said this in the Witch podcast too, it's the 3 S's for me: spooky, space, and sorcery, right? So anytime that there's a well done S, in this case, spooky, but also can be self-reflective to where maybe our biggest fears are our self-actualizations. Ooh, that's when you really get me. You know what I mean? Because then we're talking about that second level, that third heat. We're talking about it in a way that it's that is that timeless thing that we're hitting on constantly. And I think that's why this episode in particular, for so many people, is a touch point of the series as a whole, is an example. And I'm sure, Caleb, you could argue very astutely how this is probably one of the episodes that does this, and not as good of execution because of your comprehensive, I'm certain there are episodes that do this better, but for one that is so well known, publicly, damn, I just had a great time rewatching it last night. It was really, it did it for me again. And yeah, I'm scared to go to sleep later. I left an extra light on last night in my house because who knows what's going to creep up. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building, you guys. Nobody's getting in my apartment, but who knows? There could be someone on my balcony right now. And that's,
oh my God, look behind you. Oh, you're in the bathroom.
How dare you? It would be a Bloody Mary situation because I'm sitting in front of a mirror right now. But yeah, so that's why it's a classic for a reason, I think. And yeah, man, if you haven't watched it, or if it's been a minute since you've watched it, rewatch it again. It's still spooky, still does it. Well done.
Have you guys seen the Twilight Zone, the movie from 1983?
Didn't they remake this part in the movie?
This is one of the segments, and it's John Lithgow in the Shatner role, and it's George Miller of Mad Max directing fame behind the camera, and it's a lot of fun. It's really crazy.
That's my first experience with this segment, actually, was that version of it, and it terrified me as a kid. Absolutely terrified me. Because I know when I went to rewatch this original series and I got to this episode, I'm like, oh yeah, I know this. Of course I do. And I'm like, no, this doesn't look familiar. But I hadn't seen the 80s one since probably the 90s. But I just remember being utterly terrified and yeah, I didn't get like a fear of flying after this, but I don't know, maybe there's some other fears that kind of came from watching this because it's just like horrific. And as Virginia was saying, like that sense of, if you get chills or you think you see something and nobody else saw it and that kind of self-doubt. Also the like gaslighting going on here, like how frustrating. And I'm sure we've all experienced gaslighting to some degree. And when you're so sure of what you saw or experienced or something, and everybody is saying like, nope, you're wrong, like it just gets into a whole nother thing. Like I said, the show is just so high concept. Like there's so many layers to it, and it resonates so well with us. Even though it's what do we say, 60 years old, still holds up. Well, why don't we kind of wind things down here? Do you guys have any other recommendations for? I mean, we've got a whole bunch of episodes that we can watch that Caleb has provided. Again, if you haven't found them, they are on our Facebook page, Wealthy Theater's Facebook page. You can check that out for more episodes to watch from the original series. But Caleb, let's start with you. What would you recommend for somebody who was really loving Twilight Zone and wants something that's outside of the remakes and all that?
It's hard because, like I said, the Twilight Zone vibe is so singular. It's its own thing. It's like, you want more Twilight Zone, just rewatch Twilight Zone. But that being said, as far as things to watch, I'm at this point I'm just as much of an Outer Limits fan as I am of Twilight Zone, and I'm talking about the original 63 to 65 Outer Limits.
Which there was a comment, we should say, that did correct me that it wasn't just the 90s series, that there was an original as well. So shout out to Mary.
So yeah, in 63, oddly enough, these two shows are happening at the same time, and they're both they're the same thing. They're the same, different running times sometimes, and Outer Limits has its own vibe that's just different, and it's hard to explain what it is, but once you've seen it, you'll understand. It's like you can tell what episode is an Outer Limits episode and what episode is a Twilight Zone. It's a Beatles and Stones thing, I think. But Outer Limits is amazing. It's some of the scariest stuff I've ever seen. It's some of the craziest concepts I've ever seen, just like Twilight Zone. I don't know where you can watch Outer Limits right now. I think it was on Hulu recently, but I'm not sure it's still there. It may be on a streaming service, but lots of great stuff there. Also, Serling's 1970 to 1973 series, Night Gallery, which you can find for free on, if you get the NBC app, all the episodes are there. The only problem with Night Gallery that I would warn people is, again, he was severely compromised by some of the problems that he avoided with Twilight Zone. He, kind of overtook Night Gallery and turned it into a real hit or miss thing. The network controlled a lot of it. For as much as you would see absolutely terrifying, amazingly shot, groundbreaking episode, then you'd see like this silly 5-minute thing about with a bad Dracula joke or something. They're just these little episodes within episodes. But at the same time, Night Gallery, if anyone wants a list, there's 5 to 10 episodes that I think are some of the craziest things I've ever seen. I was just able to catch up on it a few years ago when they were available on Blu-ray, and just really incredible stuff. And as far as things to not watch but read, I would really encourage people to get into any of Richard Matheson's short story collections, and also Charles Beaumont. Beaumont is a lot less well-known these days. I have this 1958 paperback here. I do think that some of his stories have been collected in anthology form that you could find at the library. But Beaumont is really the unsung hero of Twilight Zone. It's sort of, people think of Serling and then they think of Richard Matheson because Matheson's more well-known for other things. But Charles Beaumont was responsible for some of the weirder elements of Twilight Zone and some of the darker elements, and he was a really interesting guy with, again, a really interesting life story of his own too. But his stories are just incredible, and really give you that same, even if you're just reading it, it gives you that same sense of just that weird creeping terror that some of the Twilight Zone vibe gives you.
Awesome. Great. Virginia, what about you? Any recommendations?
Well, I kind of mentioned it before, but the obvious spiritual successor to the Twilight Zone is what Caleb's watching right now. So the Gilmore Girls.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely watch that if you like the Twilight Zone. No, but in a similar, so The Outer Limits also has like a 90s reboot that was pretty good too.
It's
but
very
then,
well liked. Yeah. I mean, it's very well remembered.
And if you like science fiction in particular, like it's a really good one to watch. But then I would also say if you like horror a little bit more and you kind of pivot more into horror, but you're interested in that like anthology style, actually Tales from the Crypt is like a real good one, because like I think we all kind of have a picture in our minds of the Crypt Keeper and the funny silliness of him, right? But the reality is that show was so well done, and those episodes similarly, I think they were an hour each. And so, and if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. I just know that the one with Quentin Tarantino in it was like an hour long, right? It was like, or no, who am I thinking of? George Clooney. That was who are you guys? You know what I'm talking about? George Clooney, Antonio Banderas. Selma Hayek's in it. We'll add it to the screen notes of this.
Sure.
But it was an episode that I think that they made into like a log from Dusk Till Dawn. I don't know. I'll think about it later. But that was a really good show because similarly to the Outer Limits reboot time period, it was like that 90s vibe. But these were all capsule stories, so if you like anthology storytelling, that's a really good one, but it does have kind of a sillier vibe while still very much holding that spooky, scary tension in a real way. That was very well executed. I'm trying to think. I mean, it's hard because I feel like so much of current sci-fi can really call back its roots to certain things, so a lot of my mind goes to like comedy sci-fi lately too, or things that are really funny. And so there's a show called Other Space that had like one brief season on Yahoo Screen that you can now watch it on Dust, which is a free app that is also, if you like sci-fi, I would recommend everybody get the Dust app. It's free, really good content, but also independent content is being uploaded. So similarly to Shudder kind of being a really good outlet for independent horror, Dust is a cool outlet for independent sci-fi. And Other Space was created by the creator of Bridesmaids, Paul Feig. He also, the cast in it is amazing. Trace Beaulieu is in it as a robot again. He famously played the voice of Crow T. Robot in Mystery Science Theater 3000. But also Joel from MST3K is his physical self. He's not playing a robot, but he's in the show. Melania Von Traub, Kieran Sony is in it. Just a lot of really, really funny people, and really well done in terms of like the sci-fi element. It's what I imagine the Orville kind of is tonally, but it came before it and only had one season. It's the OG, if you will. And so just watch it for free on Dust. I feel like I love that show so much that anytime I get a platform to tell people to go watch Other Space, I'm like, do it. It's amazing. But yeah, I have to admit I'm not the biggest purveyor of like, I love spooky things all the time, but in terms of like constant rewatches for me, especially now, I feel like I've said this at the end of everything that we've done lately, but I'm like, if you need to go just watch, some Next Generation to feel like Captain Picard could be a real person. If you need to rewatch The West Wing to dream about the idea of President Bartlett being a real person, like, that's okay. Watch what you need to watch right now. If you got to just like rewatch old episodes of How I Met Your Mother, that is okay. Because I think a lot of what we're all just trying to do right now is unfortunately just survive, right? Like we've gotten past the point of trying to thrive in quarantine and I'm going to pickle things and run. And none of those things have happened. I'm just happy to go to my job every day. So if you're just in a place where like even the idea of starting Twilight Zone or a new thing feels daunting because it's unfamiliar and you are getting comfort from familiarity, that is also okay. And I don't think anybody was saying that it's not okay, but if you needed to hear somebody say it today, rewatch Gilmore Girls for the 15th time. I can't believe Caleb hasn't seen it all the first way through, but if you were watching it for the 15th time, you know, I know there's a lot. I was just kidding.
There's a lot of episodes.
There's a lot. It's a lot of angst. Can I ask you one question, though, that is genuine?
Sure.
You're 3 seasons in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Who do you think is the better boyfriend, Dean or Jess?
I just had this conversation the other night.
There's a correct answer, in case you're wondering. There is a correct answer.
Well, let's do a separate podcast on just that question.
No!
Coming up next on Screen Club.
That seems like a cop-out, but I'll take my answer off air.
Okay.
I expect a lot of people to get really dramatic about it, but there is a correct answer. So, but yeah, so Other Space was super fun. Tales from the Crypt is super fun. Room 104 is actually pretty good too on HBO. It's done now, but you can watch it. I think if you get like HBO Max or whatever, you can watch the old seasons, especially if you like Mark Duplass and that writing style and new directors. That was the cool thing about that show is he really was the writer and the showrunner. But if you hear him talk about it in interviews, what he wanted to create was something that would give a platform to up and coming artists and give them that voice to direct. So he really just wrote and then they would direct and he would bring in a new director every time. And that's really given a lot of platform to up and coming talent as well. So kudos to Mark Duplass for continuing to kind of be a voice in that, it's not mumblecore anymore, but it's that just like full indie scene. That was a really good show too. So
cool. Great. So we've got a lot of good recommendations. Again, check out our Facebook page.
Wait, Sarah, what are your recommendations?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Come on, you try to get out of this.
I'm trying to get out of here, you know? Yeah. Oh, man, let's see. So I started watching the show on HBO called The Third Day, which I'm not very far into it, so I don't think I could even tell you what it's about yet, but it's very unique and I feel like there's going to be some big twist and it's reminiscent of like Twilight Zone episodes in that this is not a normal world, but I don't know what the world is just yet. And it was recommended by a friend who was like, oh, if you like weird stuff, I think we're talking about Parasite and like the complexity of it and how you didn't anticipate this to happen. He said, go check out The Third Day on HBO. So I don't know, check that out. You said space stuff. The best show that I've seen so far that is about space without being in space is Moonbase 8. Wow, that rhymed way too much. And that's an A24 show that's on Showtime right now that I'm jamming on so far. But
Tim Heidecker is in that, right?
Oh my God, he's so friggin' funny.
He's so funny
so good.
And weird.
So good. Yeah, I don't know. I think we covered a lot of them that I would recommend. Black Mirror, of course, too. I think without remaking Twilight Zone, but modernizing the concept with a lot of the same topics as the subtext, I think Black Mirror does a really good job. At least I think I saw the first season or two. So there you go. There's my answers. All right, sweet. So, hey, speaking of Parasite, that movie, guess what? We're going to talk about it. So talk about a high concept movie. If you haven't seen it, don't read anything about it. Just go watch it and have a good setup too, be fully immersed in it. And this was the movie that was referenced earlier of like, if you can get past that 1-inch barrier of the subtitles, then this is an incredible world that's built and a really fascinating story or stories. And there's just a lot of subtext that we're going to be dissecting. So we're talking about Parasite on November 18. That is next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Same spot. will be here, whether you're watching on Wealthy Theater's Facebook or Cinema Lab Facebook, or we also archive it on Wealthy Theater's YouTube page too. So if you want to watch any of these later, we have them there. Speaking of archiving them, we also have a brand new podcast that certain somebody has been editing for us. So Caleb, you want to tell us about the Wealthy Theater podcast that just got launched?
Well, it's comes from the Wealthy Theater, and it's a podcast. Imagine
Wait,
that.
what?
No, I've just been taking our previous discussions, whether they're Screen Club or Cinema Lab or the two that we did over the summer with in partnership with the Grand Rapids Public Library for their GR Reads program, and just turning them into listenable podcast episodes, dropping in clips from the media that we're talking about, and it's finally available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and everybody's got Spotify, right? You don't have to listen to it on YouTube. It's so much easier on Spotify, and as soon as I can get to it, we're going to be getting this current episode out in podcast form. So it's the same talk, but you're going to be able to hear some of the reference points, dialogue from the show, music, things like that. So it's a little bit more of an immersive experience, and we're going to keep doing that. And lots of other varied TBA content related to Wealthy Theater.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. I'm excited that we've got it on several different platforms. So even if you can't devote the time to sit down in front of a screen and watch it, you can listen to it on the go too. So that's really great. And if you're jamming on stuff like Screen Club or Cinema Lab, feel free to help support us. Wealthy Theater is part of a nonprofit, which is the Grand Rapids Community Media Center. So we are a multimedia free speech platform that includes GRTV, public access, WYCE, a community radio station, the Rapidian, hyperlocal news, citizen journalism. We have IT services for nonprofits as well, education, and then, of course, Wealthy Theater. So it is a tax-deductible donation, but your donation goes a long ways for us, especially being closed right now. We're trying to put on virtual stuff and try to keep it barrier-free, and in that, I mean literally free. So donations help us with that. So feel free to hop on and donate there. All right, guys, I think we covered a lot of good stuff. We certainly could do a whole nother segment on Twilight Zone or, the movies or remakes and all that, but I think there are a lot of great takeaways here and a lot of good recommendations. So Caleb, thanks for picking this show. Thanks for being here. Virginia, all the way from Florida, thanks for hopping on. We appreciate it.
I'm already sweating.
All right, so again, we hope to see you guys. Let me pull it up here one more time. Parasite next week, November 18, 6 o'clock. Same place. Hop on, join us, watch it ahead of time so you can comment on it along with us. Until then, guys, it's been real.
The correct answer was Jess, by the way, Caleb. I'm so sorry.
Obviously.
I can't let it go. The correct answer
There it
is
is.
Jess.
I think
Obviously.
we're gonna have to do a Gilmore Girls Screen Club. So
Ooh.
there we
Not
go.
until I finish, though, so it's going to be like 2 more years.
We
Probably.
could bring Stan
2 more
back, though,
days.
because he wrote on Gilmore
That's true.
Girls, too.
Hey, there you
That's
go.
true.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Later.